James scowled, as his leg nervously bobbed up and down at rapid speeds. He released a deep sigh and glanced around, looking for a clock or any other way to tell the time. He didn't find any. Just how long had he been here? It felt like, well, he didn't even know at this point. Hours? Days? Surely it couldn't have been that long. However, his sense for time was all out of whack. And that wasn't the only thing. His head felt like it was swimming somehow, both metaphorically and literally. He felt floaty, as if his head was moving on its own instead of being carried by his neck. Probably after effects of... He reached up to rub his head, trying to remember. Something had happened, didn't it? Damn it. The nervousness was messing with his head more than he anticipated. He looked around again. Still no clock. Go figure. Left and right of him, the room was pretty much empty. Perfectly blank walls on all sides. Only the row of welded together chairs he was sitting on broke up the monotony. Even the ceiling was completely grey and smooth. His leg was still bobbing aggressively as he leaned back and released a low breath. He had wanted to sigh, but apparently he hadn't quite done it right, because the sound that reached his ear didn't fit with that at all. A bit irritated from failing at something as simple as sighing, he tried again, to similar results as before. He scowled deeply, pushing up a little, as he wondered what was going on, when his attention was suddenly caught by movement in the corner of his vision. He blinked as he looked at the man who had so suddenly appeared next to him, tensing to be on his guard at first. However, as he took in the familiar visage of the new arrival, his shoulders gradually relaxed, though a little bit of tension remained, while his eye caught the flashing of a golden symbol hanging around the man's neck. "Father Maxwell," James murmured, as he sat up a bit straighter to greet the man. "What are you doing here?" Father Maxwell looked exactly how James remembered the man. He was tall and willowy. The pale and almost slightly grey skin of his flat face was painted with deep lines, despite his relatively young age. Round, frameless glasses sat on his small nose and constantly slid down a little too much to be practical, while his jaw-length, dirty blonde hair hung around his head like curtains in a bob cut. He was dressed in a long black cloak made of an almost canvas-like material, which covered any other clothes he may have worn underneath it entirely. That was, of course, except for the golden star-framed cross around his neck. Despite his almost scary appearance, Father Maxwell had the same old smile on his face that he always did whenever he had greeted James when he came by, after his studies in the past. "I was asked to serve as your spiritual guide during these trying times," he replied openly, as he walked over to James in a slow, almost floating manner. Once he was only a step away, he made a wide gesture with his arm that was accentuated by his sleeve, which was way too wide and hung off the spindly limb. Though, instead of swinging around, it seemed to be quite stiff, simply making his arm look wider as the light quickly disappeared down its dark opening. "Is it okay if I sit with you?" James nodded. "I'm not part of the church anymore," he reminded, though as he tried to recall the time he had left the religion, his memories turned fuzzy for a moment. Father Maxwell slid into the chair next to him in a ghostly manner, sitting very straight and keeping his hands firmly on his knees. "Nobody ever truly leaves," Maxwell said, in a calm and reassuring tone. "Or, more precisely, I would not forsake one of mine, whether they are believers or not." "Maybe you should. After all, I'm a saint now," James countered, a bit sarcastically, as he scooted to the side, though it barely felt like it was putting any distance between him and the priest. Maxwell released another gentle chuckle. "Then it will be my honor to sit with you, Saint Aldwyn," he replied, and gave a mild bow of his head. "Truly the way you have come is astounding." James found himself a bit disarmed by the priest's familiar manner of speaking, and he couldn't help but smirk as Maxwell had to reach up to push his glasses back on his nose. "I have missed much in the years since you left, it seems," he then stated, and crossed his arms in his lap, still looking straight ahead, instead of making eye contact with James. "Yeah, a lot has happened," James said, and reached up to scratch his face. "It is good to see that you have still not forgotten to walk your own path," Maxwell mused, and tilted his head back into his neck to seemingly look up, though his eyes were closed. "It is an honourable thing you are doing here." James sighed and sunk into himself a bit, laying his elbows onto his knees as he put his weight forwards onto them. "Just practicing what I preach, I suppose," he remarked under his breath. "Now, you know what we think of preachers, James," Maxwell admonished him in a playfully scolding tone. "Hypocrite," James countered without missing a beat, causing both men to laugh for a few seconds. Though after a few moments, the corner of James's mouth slowly sunk down again. Something didn't sit right with him. They had that exchange often, and they laughed about it every time, yet somehow, right now, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "I don't need any guidance," he stated, without truly knowing where that just came from. Maxwell finally glanced over to him, almost curiously. There was a slight gleam in his light brown eyes as he scrutinized James with his gaze. "You don't?" he questioned outright, lifting his head to really look at the man next to him. "I don't mean to offend, James, but you are sitting all alone in the waiting area of a detention facility, just biding your time until you are locked away. You seem like a man in need of guidance to me." James's scowl deepened. Why did those words irk him so damn much? "Not my first time being arrested," he countered, with a slightly dismissive tone. "But your first time turning yourself in," Maxwell retorted. "A lot scarier than just being overwhelmed and taken away. You have to take the plunge yourself." James scoffed mildly. "I jump out of spaceships," he said with false confidence. "You've done that dozens of times," Maxwell replied. James sighed again, his irritation rising even more. He clenched his fist. He couldn't put his finger on why, but despite his brief relief to see the priest, he now just wanted him gone. "I said I do not need or want your service," he stated firmly, sitting up to look around. There had to be guards or something, right? Blank walls on all sides. Damn it. Apparently no luck. Where had the guards gone who had brought him in here? Guards had to have brought him in here, right? Suddenly, James felt a touch on his knee, instantly swatting it away. He glared over at the priest, who quickly raised both his hands in a surrendering motion. "James," he said, in a tone that was at the same time calm and worried, and infuriating. "What has gotten into you?" James wished he knew. He reached up to rub his head again, his brain still feeling like it was swimming in a bowl. "I couldn't tell you," he answered honestly. "I guess a lot has happened." Maxwell smiled at him, once again pushing his glasses up. "Why don't you relax for a moment?" he suggested, putting his hands back onto his own legs. "Those breathing exercises you were taught in the military. You still know those, right? Why don't we try it? It might help you clear your head." Although he was still inexplicably pissed off, James nodded and inhaled deeply. Father Maxwell hadn't led him wrong before, had he? In, hold, out, hold, in, hold, out, hold, in control. He repeated it a couple of times while trying to focus on the sphere of his inner world, trying his best to smooth it out. Get it perfectly round. Address the edges and bumps that have formed. Next to him, Father Maxwell appeared to be doing the exercises with him, though James's head was a bit too fuzzy to hear if he was doing it right or not really registering the man's breath at all. Back in the day, Maxwell had made it a habit to cheat a bit whenever he and James had done exercises such as this one. As he remembered that, a new flash of unexplained irritation zapped through James. Once he was done breathing, James looked down at his hands. He had brought them together. He held the thumb of his right hand between the index finger and thumb of the left, slowly rubbing one thumb over the nail of the other. His eyes widened a bit as he realized what he was seeing. He stopped the motion and lifted both of his hands. They were a bit blurry and hard to make out. His brain could barely keep track of their fingers as he looked down at them, but they were definitely both of his hands. An uncomfortable tinge spread all across his skin, almost instantly, as the realization took hold in his gut. "I'm dreaming," he said. It sounded a little like a question as he did, however it was a statement. As soon as that reality had fully taken hold, the uncomfortable tingling on his skin intensified, as a lot of strange things suddenly began to make sense. He knew that feeling. James wasn't a lucid dreamer. Whenever he realized during a dream that he was, in fact, dreaming, that feeling quickly spread over his skin, and would soon jolt him away with a shock of pain and a dose of adrenaline. However, apparently that was not an option at this moment, leaving him stranded with the painful feeling on his skin, while the impossibly constructed waiting room around him began to dissolve in detail. He managed to get one last look at Father Maxwell before he, too, vanished, like the fragment of James's imagination that he was. James huffed a bit as his mental faculties came to him little by little. He hadn't seen Father Maxwell in years, and he hadn't wanted to either. There was no way anyone would invite him as a spiritual guide for James, and even if they did, he certainly wouldn't make his way all the way over to the council station for it. The last time they had seen each other had not ended well. "Hypocrite!" James spat out, as he remembered their shouting match as they had met on opposing sides of a police barrier. James on one side, dressed in pinks, blues and purples, Nia by his side in her favourite dress, and Maxwell on the other, swinging a large sign above his head. "You know what we think of preachers, James," he had told him, after a rather intensive discussion about the failed Saviour's faith. Something that had been a light-hearted comment between them in the past turned into absolute venom in an instant. Everyone would find their own way to paradise. According to Father Maxwell, it was important to keep people from going the wrong way, by any means necessary. According to another priest James talked to, who belonged to a slightly different branch, the paths of different people could be correct at the same time, while also intercepting with each other in the worst ways possible. According to yet another branch, some people stray from the path and then tried to intercept with that of others, as they were in denial, but you could only allow them to find their way again. James had quickly decided that the church was simply not for him after that. Whatever beliefs he may have had in a higher power soon went along with it, though admittedly he was never certain how much he actually believed in the first place. It was odd that his brain would conjure up the visage of Maxwell of all people in his dreams so long after the fact, especially as he apparently temporarily suppressed the bad memories of their relationship. However, he certainly had stranger dreams in the past, and he wasn't big on trying to find the meaning in his brain's random coping. His hand reached for his chest, which was blissfully painless in his mind. By now, the memories of the fight had returned to him. Judging by how much his skin was hurting in contrast to that, he assumed that he was likely still under, after getting himself skewered. He was reasonably confident that he wasn't dead, though as his hand glided over his chest, it suddenly bumped against something. He looked down at himself in confusion, as his searching fingers closed around something sharp, even as the pain was severely numbed through the fact that it wasn't real. A star-framed cross, just like the one Maxwell had worn, just like the one Maxwell had given to him many years ago, which still hung on one of his room's walls now. Dreams really were odd, he thought, as he tried to take the pendant off, only to find that somehow pulling the band over his head was impossible. It simply stretched and tangled in all kinds of ludicrous ways to prevent him from removing it from his neck. With a sigh, he gave up. Could he simply imagine it away? This was his dream, after all. Then again, he didn't really know how. He simply gave it up and allowed the symbol to uselessly dangle from his neck. It wasn't like it would cause any issues. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart once again. Although he doubted he could get tired in a dream, he sat down, simply crossing his legs as he waited for something else to happen. As he looked down at himself, he noticed that his right arm had its correct form now, textured and grey just like it should be. He smiled a bit as he opened and closed his hand in both directions, watching the fingers bend in ways that fingers generally weren't supposed to. The movement ended with him clutching the prosthetic into a tight fist. "Get it right away next time," he silently admonished his brain, his lips slowly creeping up into a smile. His other hand now also closed into a fist in front of his chest. No regrets.